There is in our civilization a great deal of ignorance about the human condition. About the human condition. And the more spiritually ignorant you are, the more you suffer. For many people, particularly in the West, death is no more than an abstract concept. And so they have no idea what happens to the human form when it approaches dissolution. Most decrepit and old people are shut away in nursing homes. Dead bodies, which in some older cultures are on open display for all to see, are hidden away. Try to see a dead body and you will find that it is virtually illegal, except if the deceased is a close family member. In funeral homes, they even apply makeup to the face. You are only allowed to see a sanitized version of death. Since death is only an abstract concept to them, most people are totally unprepared for the dissolution of form that awaits them. When it approaches, there is shock, incomprehension, despair, and great fear. Nothing makes sense anymore, because all the meaning and purpose that life had for them was associated with accumulating, succeeding, building, protecting, and sense gratification. It was associated with the outward movement and identification with form, that is to say, ego. Most people cannot conceive of any meaning when their life, their world, is being demolished. And yet, potentially, there is even deeper meaning here than in the outward movement. It is precisely through the onset of old age, through loss or personal tragedy, that the spiritual dimension would traditionally come into people's lives. This is to say, their inner purpose would emerge only as their outer purpose collapsed, and the shell of the ego would begin to crack open. Such events represent the beginning of the return movement towards the dissolution of form. In most ancient cultures, there must have been an intuitive understanding of this process, which is why old people were respected and revered. They were the repositories of wisdom, and provided the dimension of depth without which no civilization can survive for long. In our civilization, which is totally defined with the outer and ignorant of the inner dimension of spirit, the word old has mainly negative connotation. It equals useless, and so we regard it as almost an insult to refer to someone as old. To avoid the word, we use euphemisms such as elderly and senior. The First Nation grandmother is a figure of great dignity. Today's granny is at best cute. Why is old considered useless? Because in old age, the emphasis shifts from doing to being. And our civilization, which is lost in doing, knows nothing of being. It asks being, what do you do with it? In some people, the outward movement of growth and expansion gets severely disrupted by a seemingly premature onset of the return movement. The dissolving of form. In some cases, it is a temporary disruption. In others, a permanent one. We believe that a young child should not have to face death, but the fact that some children do have to face death of one or both parents through illness or accident, or even the possibility of their own death. Some children are born with disabilities that severely restrict the natural expression of their lives, or some severe limitation comes into a person's life at a relatively young age. The disruption of the outward movement at a time when it is not meant to be happening can also potentially bring forth an early spiritual awakening in a person. Ultimately, nothing happens that is not meant to happen, which is to say, nothing happens that is not part of the greater whole and its purpose. Thus, destruction or disruption of outer purpose can lead to finding your inner purpose and subsequently the arising of a deeper outer purpose that is aligned with the inner. Children who have suffered greatly often grow into young adults who are mature beyond their years. That's true. Very, very true. What is lost on the level of form is gained on the level of essence. In the traditional figure of the blind seer or the wounded healer of ancient cultures and legends, some great loss or disability on the level of form has become an opening into spirit. When you have had the direct experience of the unstable nature of all forms, you will likely never overvalue form again and thus lose yourself by blindly pursuing it or attaching yourself to it. Attaching yourself to it. The opportunity that the dissolution of form, and in particular old age, represent is only just beginning to be recognized in our contemporary culture. In the majority of people, that opportunity is still tragically missed, because the ego identifies with the return movement just as it identified with the outward movement. This results in a hardening of the egoic shell, a contraction rather than an opening. The diminished ego then spends the rest of its days whining and complaining, trapped in fear or anger, self-pity, guilt, blame, or other negative mental emotional states or avoidance strategies, such as attachment to memories and thinking and talking about the past. When the ego is no longer identified with the return movement in a person's life, old age or approaching death becomes what is meant to be, an opening into the realm of spirit. I have met old people who were living embodiment of this process. They had become radiant. Their weakening forms had become transparent to the light of consciousness. I'll be back.